Okay, the recording hath been started. What are we doing today, Reets?
Well, you're going to have to listen to me talk for a little while.
So what else is new?
That's like every day. But no, there's okay. So like we wanted to have this conversation about like you've been using these terms synchronic and diachronic. And I had questions for you about them. And we were going to talk about them. We were going to try to like record and I would ask my questions and you would, we'd have a conversation about it. But then I had this experience this weekend that sort of like filled out, maybe answered some of my questions, but at least filled out this conversation in a way that I think will be useful and will also help it become accessible. So I'm gonna lay out my experience of the weekend, and I have my prop that I'm gonna use, and then you can then I will allow you to speak.
Wow,
So
okay. Well,
feel free. You're as always welcome to interrupt
I'll
me.
tell you what.
Or
I'll hit the mute button, and you can tell me when to unmute.
yeah, perfect.
My mute
Okay,
button, not yours.
I understand.
Okay.
Um, okay, so I went back home this weekend, like to my mom's house this weekend, and I had mentioned to you that I was struck by just like every time I go home and I look in the bathroom mirror, it's like the same mirror that I've been looking at my entire life, and that's just a little bit weird, right? Like when you think about the different moments of you as a person, of me, like looking in that mirror in different times of my life. It's kind of fun to think about. It's a little bit trippy. And then I was thinking about Michael Levin, and the selflets that he was talking about. And so he would talk about this is where my prop comes in. Are you ready? You know what this is? Did you used to have one of these? I can't, you're muted.
Yeah, I used to see those at Spencer Gifts.
Yeah. so Levin would talk about selflets, and whenever I think about the selflets, I think of the snake, because he would talk about like each little segment is a selflet, but you get the whole snake when you put all the selflets together. And of course, it's actually continuous. Like there's no actual boundary between the selflets, but I just think this is a really good way to, at least it's how I just always think of this snake whenever I think
Was
about
Levin
this.
talking about segmented worms when he talked about that? Just out of curiosity.
I don't remember. No, I think he was talking about, gosh, I have to go back and look. He's talking about like, I mean, I think it was a more kind of cosmic conversation where he was talking about how like he was talking about how we're constantly changing, but that we are always ourselves, but that each, if you sort of take a snapshot, and this is where synchronic comes into view. If you take a snapshot of your place in time, that is he said that he had like coined this word selflet to describe like what the self is in this particular moment in time, but that the self itself is this constantly changing. I think it was when he said if we could all become more aware of this fact, that we might be more amenable to change, because it's just we are always changing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the selflet that you are right now is going to be a different selflet than the selflet that I was when I was 15 and looking in that mirror. And that doesn't mean that I wasn't Rita then, and it doesn't mean that I'm not Rita now, but that there are these sort of different selflets that kind of, but also that's a construct, right? That they're actually continuous. And so driving away, I was feeling feelings, and so I was like, okay, what are the feelings that I'm feeling? Because I think you and I had talked before it happened, and we used the word nostalgia, and so I was thinking like, I'm certainly feeling nostalgia, but it's not just nostalgia. There's a feeling of feeling my whole self, of being able to fill in, to have an awareness of the continuity of selflets that I carry, which are always there, but which I don't necessarily allow to rise into my consciousness. When I sort of like take, if this is my selflet right now, this like blue one, and I just kind of lifted it up and connected it with all these selflets from the first 20 years of my life, and now they're in comparison to each other, or they've like met. And that's a really interesting feeling, and it calls those old selflets up into consciousness, and it creates, beyond nostalgia, what I felt was a reverence for my past selflets. Like it was like, and a familiarity and a gratitude. And I also just felt the phenomenology of my own continuity.
Mm-hmm.
And it was cool, right? Like it felt good, and it felt really healthy, and it felt like I felt more resilient because I reconnected with those. And I felt, and then I could jump into my current selflet, and my current selflet felt more filled out, and it felt like I felt the full scope of the gratitude for where my current selflet is. Okay, so that all happened, and then
I see that. I see the fractal that you are setting
about
up.
that I'm
Yeah.
setting up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I'm like, okay, so this is like what Rich is trying to do, but with the cosmic story, right? So you're trying to get us to recognize that we actually have selflets that don't just go back the number of years that we've been alive.
Or even just in the moment we're in now.
Say what you mean by that. What do you mean?
Well, I see that, like, with respect to like what we're studying, like what we're exploring now in terms of like theories of consciousness and stuff, everybody's looking at it like, oh, consciousness, this is what it is. They're only looking at the here, the now, the selflet that is now, and without any regard really to its developmental trajectory, without its developmental path. And so
Right.
you're only going to see this very narrow slice of what consciousness is.
Yeah. So what you're doing, which is crazy, maybe debatably, is you're trying to get people to remember who they were before they were them, right? Like as we call ourselves us, like
which doesn't sound crazy, especially in terms of what meditators seem to be engaging with or contacting, which is the no self.
And so what you're trying to do when you when you tell the story of the cosmos, or you go on a geology walk and you show people a rock, right? And you're giving them an experience. It's like you're trying to talk to someone with amnesia, and you're trying to get them to remember where this thing is, like in their body, in their past.
In their ancestry.
Yes. Yes.
That rock is actually an ancestor.
Yes. And so I thought we could start here, because I thought, okay, so I think one of my questions for you was like, in a diachronic. So, well, one of the is like, why diachronic?
I don't know. It might just be an artifact that it comes out of linguistics.
Yeah, because I don't think that does a service to the word. And then what I think I asked you, like, does diachronic have to be propositional? And I think that what I experienced this weekend was the phenomenology of a diachronic, right? That I had experiences that were priors, and you
felt that as participatory.
Right. And so I think, like, for you, and I'll stop talking really soon, but like when you teach what this rock is, when you do teach the science and the geology, you try to match it with an experience to really help call up these like very, very deep, inhibited,
I'd say forgotten
memories that we hold. And that's a really hard thing to do. And so I just thought it was cool to feel. I mean, not that I haven't felt it before. I've working with you a long time, and I definitely feel the benefits of what you're trying to do, but to feel it in a smaller fractal, a personal way, it really helped frame the work. So I'll stop. And
no, I see what you're doing there. And I think that's great. It's another kind of experience that we can have, an intimate experience that we can have. And if we're willing, we can expand that experience out to the infinite. I see that.
I think what was so great is like the experience that I had this weekend is an experience I think a lot of people can
start with,
recall, right? Yeah. Like a lot of people have seen, associate with the experience that I just described. But what I can also, it's similar to like the gorge when I was going to see my father-in-law, and I was like, this is a familiar feeling. What is it? And it was like, oh, the feeling of walking into the gorge. I was like, oh, this feeling of like nostalgia mixed with reverence, mixed with gratitude, mixed with resilience, mixed with like a sense of a bigger, wholer self. That's familiar. What is that? And then it was like, oh, that's the terrain that like,
Mm-hmm.
that's what Rich cultivates. And
Mm-hmm.
like, that's the space that we operate in, but it's a much, much deeper.
Well,
And
okay,
so,
but you
yeah.
might also be experiencing what like Lisa Barrett Feldman would call the multimodality of higher order brain states. I'm not dismissing or
Mhm.
discounting what you're saying. I'm just saying that there are correlates in the neuroscience we're talking about where you might be mapping the familiar emotional states of
Mhm.
one life event or life situation with another life scenario, which I think she means by multimodal, that this feeling or this emotion can map and be used, can be conjured in
Mhm.
brain activity and then be mapped onto different. All I'm saying is that what you're saying, what you're describing, is consistent with what they're saying. I think what you're also saying is that that's a useful practice.
Yeah, like I think that might be the way to do it. Like I think that might be the way to access if
It's
we can.
always that. In fact,
Yeah.
that last Sam Harris thing, were they talking about self-referential thinking? Like whether we're just talking about how anything that we encounter, there's a there's an algorithm in our neurological architecture that's running that's saying, how does this thing relate to me? And so
Mhm.
what you just presented was something that relates to you and that
Mhm.
can relate to anybody. And we can
Mhm.
then take that and expand out on it. But again, like I always say, that's you, Rita. You're primed. You are like conditioned to seek meaning in everything. And I think that unfortunately the world, or at least the culture that we're in, anesthetizes people to that. And so they, you know what I mean, they don't go as far as you do in terms of meaning, seeking meaning or making meaning out of experiences.
Yes, and that's the trans paradigmatic work, right? So
Yeah.
if we know that we have a tendency to do something that is less of a tendency that others might, when there's a moment that I have an experience that is fairly common, that I can use it as a way to fractalize what we're trying to
Right.
do.
And let's not forget that every fractal really is a signal of the continuity. It's not just a fractal like, oh, there's a fractal out there. It's the fractal that's in there, in here, as well as out there, which
Right.
means, oh, in here and out there are on a continuum. It actually is a signal to the continuity.
Yeah, and I think what's so exciting, or what is so exciting to me about this particular fractal is it's one that doesn't jump substrates because it's a fractal of a bigger thing that we're trying to do that is
I
still
see.
on the same continuum.
Yeah.
So if someone can feel the benefit of linking up to something from their own past, their own human past, and it feels good and it makes you feel all the feels and resilient. Like that resilience is a big one, I think, because it just, it makes you see your past and your present and your future in a way that is like feels very grounded. And what it's saying is like, okay, but you just did that here. You could actually do that all like down, 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 down here. Stop.
If you have continuity really established in
Right.
your higher order priors, if you have that continuity is like a running,
Right.
and they people
Right.
don't,
Which I guess maybe what you're
people
saying.
don't. Ever since Descartes,
Right.
they just don't.
Tell me if this is maybe what you're kind of suggesting. If I didn't have the rest of the continuity established, maybe I wouldn't have even noticed
Right.
this. But I
Right.
think, but that's okay because I think that's why we're talking about it because it doesn't matter if other people don't notice it, but if we've noticed something that is potentially accessible, let's call it out
And
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 see
try
if
to
that might
communicate it.
be, yeah, and then maybe that's an entry point for somebody. So yeah, I think,
Yeah.
but man, does it get like, it's like, boy, it gets exponentially more like, the gratitude, the reverence, the resilience, like there's so much more for it to become or
I
feel
know.
or be. And so it's just,
Awesome.
that's all.
I also just, let's take a moment, have a little gripe session maybe about
Well, wait, before that,
before. Wait, you're gonna make me.
do you
You're
do
gonna.
you want to say anything more though about your feelings about synchronic and diachronic and why?
That's what I was talking about. My
Oh,
gripes about
great. Okay, good.
it. Yeah, I
Good,
have
good.
feelings. They're gripes.
Okay.
That
Okay.
just about everything that I engage with out there in terms of the research and the listening to other people talk and tell their stories and present their theories and they're all taking a synchronic view, which is a slice. In this moment, this is what consciousness, this is what being a human is. And they're taking the full complement of our neurological architecture, our entire inheritance, our bodies, and using it as it is now to examine what it is now. So everything's like this. It's taking one slice. And I can see where it falls short. I can see how taking that synchronic approach just presents this two-dimensional surface to examine, and that's what they're doing. They're saying, oh, look, this is what it is. And they don't talk about, well, how did it get to be where it is? This is what big history does to you when you start thinking, well, how did it become to be? And I do see some, like I hear Lisa Bradford talking about, well, we don't have a reptilian brain because we didn't evolve from reptiles. We evolved from fish. Okay, great. That's a great diachronic statement, but that's as far as it goes. It doesn't ever go deeper and deeper and deeper. It's like when people get obsessed with a philosopher, they look at what that philosopher was philosophizing in the moment that they were alive, looking at the surface of, they're looking at the surface again. And that's great. I think we need that because, like, when I look at this, the kind of constellation of theories of consciousness right now, we need all of them, whether it's integrated information theory or global workspace theory or Bayesian brain stuff and predictive processing. Those are all like, yeah, that's a description of what it's doing now. But what about how did it get there? They're not establishing continuity with the evolution of animal life, of complex creatures with neurological architecture that interacts with sensory motor systems and world. They're not looking at the developmental trajectory of it. And that's all I do. Like, that's really, when I'm not studying some neuroscientific theory, I'm looking at the history of life on Earth, the history of nature, the history of the cosmos in a way that creates inextricable continuities. And that's diachronic. So I'm just saying, my gripe is that we don't do that. And by not doing that, we fail to establish the deep layers of continuity that we forfeit all of that, 13.8 billion years of cosmic evolution, or at least, 3.84 billion years of biological evolution. We forfeit all of the intelligence. And then we just take this stance like we're separate from that and we're looking at sorry, I see you wanting to speak, so go for it.
It's not all you do, because you spend time in it too, right? And so, like, you're doing that while you're spending time in it. So it is all you do, but you also spend time with the information, in the information, as the information, right? So
we all do.
I wanna. Some people would say, and I think it's helpful to again use the self as a fractal here, where I could say, well, I'm in the house that I currently live in, and I know my history. I can list my history off to you. I can tell you where I went to school. I can tell you the jobs that I've had. I can tell you the people that have been in my life. Like, I can list it. I know it. I hold it with me in my synchronic selflet. So when you tell me that this is just a snapshot, it's not just a snapshot because it's in me and I know it. It's in my brain. I can tell it to you. That is very different than going and spending an afternoon with people who I grew up with. And so I think where we sometimes get misunderstood or snapped is where people hear you speaking, arguing for a diachronic view, and they say, like, I know that. I know about evolution. I know about the Big Bang.
Yeah.
I know about all these things. I know, and I hold that with me. When I talk about a philosopher, I hold all that with me.
Do?
I got it. Huh?
They do? I mean,
I don't know. I'm just like creating a scenario here.
Okay. You're playing devil's advocate.
I'm saying that there's a space in between here where someone could say, just in the way that I could say, yeah, I'm in my current life, but I have my past life in me. So it's my selflet, my snapshot is inherently diachronic because I know all the things that I did. And that's not the case, because you actually have to, not only do you need to hold the knowledge, the awareness of the sort of quantitative history, the propositional, this happened and then this happened and then this happened, but you also need to rekindle and bring up the phenomenology of those things. And that's what you do when you go spend time with rocks, and when you go spend time with trees, and when you go whatever. Like, what you do every day is you hold the memory of the, the kind of quantitative rundown of what it all is, but then you match it with the qualitative so that it stays alive in you. It's one thing to know it, but it's another thing to keep it alive in you. And what that takes is experience.
To be it.
Right. And so what I felt this weekend was like a rejuvenation of these former selflets of the first 15, 20 years of my life. They became alive again. And so I was able to feel the continuity of Rita in a phenomenological way, rather than just a propositional where
Sure.
I could rattle off who Rita is to you and what happened to Rita. I could rattle that off. That doesn't mean that I'm actually in touch with the feeling of who Rita is. And so what I felt this weekend was like, whoa, I could feel who Rita was, and that is how that is part of who Rita is, in a way that felt really good and made me feel really grateful and resilient.
Well, imagine how good it feels when that timeline extends back indefinitely.
Exactly.
So, and not only that, but my timeline at some point then intersects with your timeline. It becomes our timeline.
Yes.
Not only yours and mine, but you and me and your kids and your parents and I suddenly am like, oh, we have a shared origin, which means we also have a shared fate.
Yeah, and there's the entanglement, right? But like, and this is what you mean when you say like nature needs a seat at the table, or like we need to be actually bringing nature into. It's not we need to like hold nature in our mind and make sure that it's in there with the rundown of what it's that we actually need to keep nature alive, and the only way to do that is to have a relationship with it. And a relationship doesn't work if you don't go spend time with the thing that you're trying to relate to. And like that is the phenomenology of diachronic.
I feel like I'm being lectured by me all of a sudden. No, I mean,
lectured you by yourself.
But I'm excited by it, so it's not like I'm like, oh, she's lecturing me. I'm just saying, you know, like, yeah. Okay, cool. Well, let's just keep this one short. We got a call coming up in a half hour anyway, so we'll just keep this one short and see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.